there. We are worried about rogue states and we are worried about terrorist movements, but for that purpose you do not need such vast programs of nuclear weapons.
You have referred to a cold peace, that's what we're involved with now. Can you explain what you mean?
Yes, I think that after the end of the early 90s, we were moving into a détente that was very hopeful, and there were lots of problems that were solved. You remember we had problems in Central America, we had problems in Angola and Mozambique, and that was dissolved. These problems were dissolved, and yet we did not manage to get to any substantial disarmament. And the tone between the U.S. and its allies on the one hand, and on the Soviet Russians on the other hand, has been a very cold one. And what we would need now is that all sides would reduce their armaments, whereas in practice we hear a lot of discussion about new types of nuclear weapons in the United States. And we also hear that the Russians are beginning to say that if we do not have a more of a movement in the peaceful direction, they too may strengthen their military capability. So the world has been going in the wrong direction for a number of years, and we would need to change that course.
You've talked about strengthening legal barriers against the use of armed force, but saying that the U.S. has renounced legal restrictions that it itself actually helped formulate after World War II in 1945. Can you explain?
Yes, the UN Charter, which was drafted in San Francisco and with strong U.S. influence, states that you can only use force in self-defense against an armed attack. And armed force can also be used when authorized by the Security Council. But in the uprun to the war in Iraq, these restrictions were renounced by the U.S. and it was declared that this was far too limited rules, and that the U.S. felt free to intervene against what they saw as a danger. If a country were developing nuclear weapons then, it said it's too late to intervene. So the U.S. took the view that they could, as a preventive matter, attack a country that was developing a nuclear program. The UK did not really sign on to that theory, or that position, but said that no, they would like to stick to a right to intervene against countries that were launching an armed attack or were in an imminent position to do so. So here is something where we will need, I think, to come back to the UN Charter, because otherwise it would enable countries to go to action against anything that they saw as a threat.
Right now in Dublin, a conference is taking place around cluster bombs, a treaty for anti-cluster munitions around the world. The U.S. is not there.
No, the cluster bombs were used extensively, and they were used also in Lebanon, and they have a very severe effect on civilian populations because they do spread. If they are used on the battlefield, it is one thing, but if they are used in areas where there are also civilians, it really they act as an indiscriminate weapon, and that is the background why it's urged that there should be a restriction or a ban on their use.
What is the significance of a country like the United States, the largest manufacturer of cluster bombs, not participating in this treaty?
Well, of course, that is a serious weakening of the negotiation situation. However, I think that those who are pushing for negotiations and want to have a ban, that they hope that nevertheless in the longer run, the United States or others who do not participate, that they will join such a treaty if it were concluded. We have seen examples of that before, where states have refused to join a ban that was concluded, but joined it much later. So I think that's the calculation of those who urge a ban.
You, Hans Blix, are turning 80 years old in June. You've served as the Swedish Foreign Affairs Minister, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the chief UN inspector in Iraq, and now the chair of the Weapons of Mass Destruction Commission in Sweden. Do you have any plans to retire?
have usually say that I have retired 3 times and I'm not going to do it again. No, I think so long as I feel I have something to say and something, and I know something, then I will continue to do so. And I have lots of invitations from all around the world to come and to speak. And I think that we need a tremendous effort to get to disarmament. We have discovered that global warming is something very serious, and I think that the world, and thanks to many people, the world is beginning to wake up to that. But the global warming is certainly a huge danger, and I agree with all those who wish the world to take action on it, in particular reduce the consumption of fossil fuels. We must not forget that we still have an enormous amount of money spent on weapons, and that it is risky, and that we see threats about the use of these weapons. We have not come to a disarmament. The Cold War is over, but we have not got into the stage of disarmament. It's high time that we do that.
The role of the media in all of this, the role of the media, for example, in the lead up to the invasion, in the United States in particular, the constant repetition of the allegations of weapons of mass destruction.
Well, there's been a focus by the U.S. and other nuclear weapon states upon those who do not have nuclear weapons and say this is the great danger in the world that they may acquire them. However, I think that one must also look at those who have the nuclear weapons and get a reduction on them. At the peak of the Cold War, there were something like 55,000 nuclear weapons in the world, and today perhaps there are 27,000. And that is far too much. There is no reason why we should have so many nuclear weapons. And you have on the United States itself, you have a very powerful and important group that is urging nuclear disarmament, led by former Secretary of State and by Bill Perry and by Kissinger and others. And I think that's a discussion that is extremely important and has a lot of echoes around the world. The Cold War is over. And the Russians are not seeking to expand their power or their empire any longer. And we ought to draw the conclusions from that and come to a disarmament.
The U.S. is the #1 superpower on Earth. You have called the Western powers hypocritical in their approach to Iran and the nuclear issue. What is the single most important thing you think the U.S. can do right now?
I think that the issue on the top of the agenda should be the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. That was negotiated for a good number of years, and it was agreed in the middle of the 90s, and then it was rejected by the U.S. Senate. And I see now that both Mr. Obama and Hillary Clinton are favoring that this be concluded. I think if the U.S. moved ahead under a new president, I don't think that McCain has really ruled it out either. If the U.S. moved ahead and said that we will ratify it, then I think it's very likely that the Chinese, who have not ratified, will follow. If China does it, maybe India does. If India does, Pakistan does, etc. And the treaty would enter into force. It would be a great thing if we outlawed any nuclear weapons tests in the future. But there are also a number of other measures that would be high on the agenda. An agreement to stop the production of fissile material for weapons, for one thing, and quite a whole catalogue of items really that we could embark upon. But the sad fact is that the Conference on Disarmament that was set up by the United Nations years ago, that this has not been acting for over 10 years now.
We're going to have to leave it there. Hans Blix, I want to thank you for being with us, former Chief UN Weapons Inspector in Iraq. I'll be in Asheville Friday night, Atlanta Saturday. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.